So here we are in July of 1915. Um, Situation in the last couple of turns has gone rather well for the Central Powers, I think. Both the French and the Russians have bloodied themselves terribly in their grand offensives, and the German grand offensive hasn't been too bad. There's definitely a cost on everybody's side, though, for it. So let's look at what's happening. Over here on the West Front, the French have been constantly attacking Thionville, which is indeed this hex here, which is fortified. They've been being bled white, and the Germans have been taking losses too, but nowhere near the same number. The French unleashed gas there, and they also started with the heavy artillery barrages. These are both combat tactics, which give some slight advantages. Neither one did much for them. The Swiss did their foolhardy attack and ended up losing Zurich due to the losses they've taken. Take a look. There's not much of a Swiss army left. Just 2 units there. They got some really unlucky rolls. Probably should listen to Bart, but I'm trying to bleed the Germans dry. It's just not working. The Italians launched their major offensive, and it was done too hastily. The Austrians were able to slip some troops up in time and pretty much stop it in its tracks. If the Austrians had any manpower, it would be a Caporetto situation where they'd be plowing across, but they just don't have the staying power to come across. Let's look at the East Front. The Russian armies, which have been engaged in it, that's the 2nd and 3rd here, attacking at Tarnow. Brutally bloody battle. First turn was just horrible for both sides. Second turn, the Russians definitely walked away the losers. And meanwhile, over on the German attacks, heading for, what is that, Lodz? They were centered on the forest a little west of Lodz, and they were stopped, but it wasn't a happy occurrence for anyone. More on Russia over here, looking at Enver Pasha's 3rd Army. It's moved a little bit of ground against the 10th Army, which is under Yudanovich. The Balkans were quiet. There's restrictions on who can attack the Central Powers. Well, not entirely quiet over 2 turns. The Bulgarians definitely made some inroads there, and the Serbian position is trying to hold Belgrade, but not in great shape. The British also did some fighting against the Bulgarians, and I think there was a little bit of fighting between the Turks and Greeks. But on the last turn, nothing happened. And what's happening here is the Central Powers just don't have the manpower to keep fighting in the Balkans, but the Entente has limited amounts of times that it can attack each of the Central Power forces without making a roll. I'm not sure they really want to right now, just in terms of it would be the Serbs attacking the Austrians, and the Serbs are not in great shape, neither are the Bulgarians. Nobody's in great shape right now. Speaking of which, the English made their attacks on Turkey. And here we got, the English 5th Army coming out of Egypt, and it pretty much got hosed completely. On the other hand, down coming out of Basra area, I think that's the 4th? Yeah, the 4th Army did fairly well. I know it doesn't look like much, but they've got to get the river line so that they can get to Mosul. There was the revolt over in Arabia. They marched into Hejaz and got themselves eliminated. What else do we have? We have the African situation, where the French are still garrisoning Togo, trying to make those Germans go away. They're working on, what was it, Kenya? No, Cameroon. Okay. They're working on conquering that, Cameroon, and they've also moved the combined Allied army into German East Africa to conquer it. But the Germans are busily taking South Africa. They managed to clear the forces out of there. Final big blow, Japan entered the war and is besieging Quintao. They can't do a hell of a lot. They got a big army, but there's nothing to really fight where they're allowed to be. We'll see what happens in August. At some point I want to go into the mechanics of the play, probably once I'm done actually. There's some really exciting factors of that. I may just set up a little, because the way the ground battles, so a lot of games, and I'll go into this later, but a lot of games have really, really detailed maybe naval battles, maybe slightly more detailed air combat, but the ground combat is usually fairly simple, single die roll on a chart or whatever. Well, and I've got my disagreements with this in terms of slowing the game down, because battles are really, really expensive. But in this game, there's levels of detail like that on every single kind of combat. So air battle, you take out different air wings and actually fight them out separately against each other. Naval battle, it's almost ship by ship. I mean, they're not lining up against each other. Well, yeah, actually they are. But squadron by squadron, like ships. And then with the military, you break each army into corps, and 2 corps engage one another at each time. There's special bombardment rules for the preliminary bombardment. All kind of fancy chrome added to this. If you don't like chrome, you will hate this game. But I really love chrome, and I think this game really excels in how it handles a lot of the aspects of it. That's why I say it's hard to tell, because so one of the exciting things that happens, the casualties this turn were horrific. In terms of national will, the amount of casualties that the Russians took dropped them down to the 14 box. Now that was far enough down that they had to make a strike roll. So now there's actually a strike afflicting the Russians. And then they had to make a mutiny check, which they couldn't fail, and that drove them back up. Then their government fell in order to get it so that they don't just surrender next turn to their losses. There's just so many different factors to it that, you know, one bad turn can you lose a country, can knock a country out of the war. It really can be that way. So, you know, that's why I say I'm still playing it, even though I think the Centrals are doomed. And I really do think they are, especially the Italian situation is just, I don't think the Austrians can hold that forever. They can't hold that forever and defend the Balkans. But if you see a widespread Russian collapse, and the Russian army is paper thin right now, well, that's a lot of Austrian troops that can come over and work in the West. The actual French front requires very few troops for both sides. So there's still a chance here, especially if you start seeing things like the Turks beating the English. Again, bad rolls happen, but there's a lot of that can happen in this game. There's a lot of variability and a lot of randomness. I think the telling point, though, is going to be the Romanian situation. Right now, that's the biggest issue. Romania slipped a little further into the Entente camp. That's going to make it a lot harder for the Centrals to either keep them out of the war, which probably isn't enough at this point, or if they could actually get the Romanians on their side, that's very impressive, because the Russians just, you know, have this additional border they have to defend. They just do not have the troops anymore to cover that entire border. They're weak enough where they are, because the German units especially are just so much better than most of the Russian units. Some Siberians and some Guard can stand up to them. But once you get past their few good units, they really can't fight. Now the problem is the Germans can't really undertake an offensive across the front. They can take their major offensive. That bleeds them so far down that they don't have... Uh-oh, I'm almost out of time. Okay.